The lecture you're about to see tonight is in memory of Maurice Childs, the late founding principal of CBT Architects in Boston. This is the first Maurice Childs Memorial Lecture, and it's a living legacy to his contributions to the design profession and a tremendous gift to the BAC and our extended community. The lecture tonight also coincides with the 50th year anniversary of CBT Architects. And I'd like to begin tonight by introducing Charles Securus, a founding principal of CBT, to speak a little bit about the lecture and about Maurice Childs. Charles?
I'm told that I have to speak into this, correct? Can everyone hear me? You know, I had an older brother who was a mentor of mine, who was a very serious guy. And he once told me that whenever you're in front of an audience like this, you should say something really profound, something meaningful. He also said that when that same audience is waiting to hear a great lecture, you better be pretty damn fast. So I intend to be fast tonight. My 50 years ago this month, CBT was started. We were called CBT Associates, and Maurice Childs, who's now deceased, Richard Bertman, and myself were the three founding partners of the firm. And on his death, partners at CBT determined to have something to dedicate to his life. And he had two very strong interests in architecture. One was historic preservation, that is, concern about the historic artifacts of this country. And the second was education of young architects. We investigated both. And when we came to the BAC and talked to the president, we asked him the question, is there something missing in your program academically that would be really helpful? And he jumped to the conclusion and said yes. What he really said was a speaking program. We don't have a meaningful speaking program, and we really need one. So my partners and I decided to dedicate this lecture series to the Boston Architectural College. At that time it was called Boston Architectural Center. And upon our 50th year, we decided to initiate that program. And Thom is going to be speaking tonight. And I told him he better be pretty damn good because this is the first lecture of this series. And he promised me he would be good. So with no longer ado, I'm going to introduce the president again, who will introduce Thom.
And in our audience tonight are many of the principals and others from CBT, and let us welcome them as well. Thom Mayne is an internationally renowned architect, educator, and author. He is a founding principal of the firm Morphosis, and they produce work that transcends the normal bounds of traditional forms. Mayne studied architecture at the University of Southern California and Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. He co-founded Southern California Institute of Architecture, or SCIARC as it is known, with the goal of bolstering architecture with a strong sense of social conscience. Thom has received many awards and accolades over his distinguished career, including the American Academy's Rome Prize, the Pritzker Architectural Prize, often referred to as the Nobel Prize of Architecture, the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal, that organization's highest honor. Thom has authored or co-authored many books, including Combinatory? What? Okay. Which he said, Urbanism, the Complex Behavior of Collective Form, Live Plus Work, Modern Homes and Offices, and his most recent book, 100 Buildings, just came out, which has been described as a touchstone of our time by today's leading architects and teachers of architecture. A limited number of copies of 100 Buildings, graciously autographed by Thom, are available for purchase in the lobby outside the hall after this lecture. Get in line fast, though, because I think they're going to go really fast. Thom taught at the University of Pennsylvania. He's taught at UCLA, where he is currently a tenured member of the faculty, Columbia University, Harvard University, Yale University, the Berlage Institute in the Netherlands, and the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. Currently, oh, someone said something. I'm sorry. What? Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to pay attention here. Earlier today, he gave us at the BAC the privilege of reviewing and critiquing several of our students' projects. For that, we are very grateful. So please join me in welcoming the inaugural Maurice F. Childs Endowed Lecturer, Thom Mayne, and his lecture entitled Multiple Agendas. Thom?
I might do, yeah, okay, right, okay. Charles put me under pressure here, being the first of the first, etc. And but I have to say, and then I created, like, see one of them right in front of me, a series of students a couple hours ago, and it puts me under even more severe pressure because I tend to be a fairly tough critic. And now I've got to kind of put up or show my stuff. And I wanted to say the 100 book, if I can make a slight correction, it's a work from the Now Institute, which I started at UCLA, and it's a book by students, for students. And it came out of an observation in my academic world that more and more of you young students, are less invested in very recent history. I wouldn't even call it history. Many of them are living architects. And it seemed to me it's valuable, and it's a product of the digital world and an intense interest in the present. And I understand all that, but it's just useful to know people like Arthur Graham and Jane Sterling, or there's some characters around it. I think you'd find interesting, and it's also intricate. When you look at architecture in a complete form, instead of looking at it as fragments of things, starting with concepts, it comes with a totality, which includes a set of value systems. Okay, I put together a lecture tonight. If you mind, sit down on my. Okay, I've got knee problems. I put together something that's going to hopefully start a conversation, and it's for students. And I purposely put something together for you, and it's not for the profession. And that's going to take you through a thinking process. And in no way am I interested in actually explaining the project. What I'm interested in is locating kind of intellectual terms as well as its pragmatic circumstances. It allows you to understand a progression of thought that I think is the most useful to you as young people starting your career, and directly connect to some of our conversations we're having today as we have a critique of a project. And that critique is based on a set of attitudes that connect to a set of values. And then I think it's especially important. Well, I should say also, if I was going to push it, I would say we really can't explain projects, and that in a really thorough way. We can pretend to explain projects, but the reality is so complex at a very complicated psychological level regarding architect, client, broader team, etc., that it's a very private conversation, and you can't really have an open, true conversation. You're getting a kind of a very distilled, it's been modified for an audience that eliminates most of the important things that you're going to find out as you start practicing architecture. But the ideas can be talked about, and I put it in three phases. The first one is kind of the learning process, and it took place. Oh, thank you. It establishes the kind of fundamentals of where you're going to be as an architect. And for me, it's a couple decades, 20 years. And then it starts with kind of a practice in a more consistent way, in a more, let's say, quote, serious way in terms of the outside world. And then it's going to end in urban design thinking. And I'm just showing, I think, one project. You may have time for that. And it's going to connect to kind of broader, more strategical kind of issues. And I would have said in your generation, and it came up today in the jury, that unlike my generation, and I'll talk about it in a minute, that could start in a much more purely artistic sense, that's another generation that isn't open to you, and that I would say that you have to be much more strategical, much more tactical, and you have to kind of identify the nature of your work within broad political, economic, social terms, right? And that there just isn't many people that are interested in aesthetics. Because I'm going to tell you, and we have an office that most people think we get a certain type of client. Very few people are interested in aesthetics. Very few people have any knowledge of architecture. It's an incredibly esoteric art form. And you could be speaking astrophysics or evolutionary biology. It's in those terms. And I think because of that, you're going to find as you leave this place that you are going to have to find the terms by which you produce your architecture as an art form. Because I'm going to say that that you're heading for an incredibly important place as you walk out the doors of this institution, and that I think from the very beginning you're going to start. You're going to make choices, and the choices will have very much to do with the uniqueness of architecture as a profession, as it moves between a service industry and a world of business, and the pragmatic world and an art form. And it's quite different than poetry, than literature, and most other art forms where you can live pure left and not be negotiating left and right. And architecture is a social art form, and it's a radically connected art form that you are aware of now, of course. And that you're going to be balancing this. And in the very beginning, you're going to make some choices that have to do with your interest in that relationship, of your how as you leave this place, the sense you have vis-a-vis your own ambitions. And because I'm going to say that architecture is going to require a fairly robust ambition, because it's going to come from you. No one's going to ask you. No one's going to pressure you in producing the work. It's going to be something that you instill in the outside world, and it's going to be directly connected to you. For me, I've always connected in the sports analogy. Kind of stupid, probably, but it's soccer and not American football. American football, you call a number and everybody goes someplace. In soccer, if you don't make it, if you're not active in observing the thing, it's really, really a dull. What's happening? Another one?
Sorry. Yeah.
Isn't it working? It sounds like it works.
It's working. That the live stream's having a little trouble. So.
Whatever. You say so. Okay. The building blocks. And I've showed this. I had to dug this up. And I was going, yeah, it's interesting. This is my third year project with my name Ralph Knowles, and my undergraduate essay. I'm I don't know, 19 or 20 years old. And I was in an educational point in the late 60s. And it was the exhaustion of the modern project was taking place, and it was taking place in the academic institution. And there was just a whiff of a computer, which was still the size of a room in Stanford and Berkeley. And there was an interest in the beginning notion of a broader kind of ecological perspective that was coming out of landscape. And there's people like, I'm going to say these people, if you're just going to look them up, people like Ian McCart and Christopher Alexander. And you keep hanging out here. He was just reading a chapter or something. These are kind of interesting guys. And it was very kind of anti-historical, including modernism. It was an attack on the modern project. And it had a critique of especially at an urban level of the modern project. But what he did, and I didn't realize this maybe for 2 decades after I left school, is that it started me in a way of thinking that stayed with me, and it was about architecture, which is a result of forces that produce it, right? And I was very kind of clear when I left school. I had no idea what to do with it, that somehow this had something to do with architecture. And they were coming from forces of nature, in this case, wind, water, a movement of land. And then very soon after that, I had to go back and start. I was kind of left in a place that there was no direct connection about what I'd studied for 5 years and the world I was heading in architecture. And I started drawing, and my first partner was just in front of me at NC. It was a kind of classical school, and they were looking at history. He knew Corbusier. I didn't know. I had no idea who Corbusier was. that is so extreme, right? And now I was kind of, it was also highly rational, and it kind of beat out the subjective part of it. And so when I left, I was very oriented towards a very kind of rational, and that part maybe was a certain part of mine was further along. And I started drawing, and I was using drawing as thinking, and I was just returning to things that made sense to me personally. I was just finding my own way. I had no idea where I was going, what I was doing, but I was making things. And again, like a lot of you, I was just trying to keep busy. Couldn't get work, couldn't get hired to save myself to do a building, and did graphics, made objects, furniture, lights, was teaching. My teaching was allowing me to ask questions. And I had no idea what architecture was, so teaching was a way of just talking to your students and asking just essential issues. What is architecture at this time in history, et cetera, et cetera, and what does it mean? But I was in a shop, and I was actually returning to things I was really comfortable with, because I entered architecture kind of through the back door maybe, and that I was not a particularly scholastic kid, and spent most of my time in the principal's office, et cetera. And I came from a kind of academic family and I had a mother that either go to Harvard or Yale, and nobody talked to me. That's where I came from. And she was a pianist out of the Sorbonne and blah, blah, blah. And I ended up going to like woodshop and took drafting and car mechanics when they still had that shit. And loved it. And my dad had left, and we were living in the hood, and I was building race cars and learning how to take engines apart and just having a ball and supporting myself to do those kind of things. And I was interested in the mechanics of stuff. And so that somehow it connected me up really early on in architecture, and the making and the physicality of the work was very important to me. And the notion of that really simple joy you get from making something and observing it and just liking the shit you make. It's just really, it's like a little kid. It starts at like 4 years old, right? And I'm making this stuff, but we're asking questions, and we're learning because we didn't want to do traditional things. So I'm learning how to deal with metal and how you work with a brake, the benzene, and I'm casting, and I'm learning how to do that. And it's going to start forming who we are. And so we're going to start getting little jobs in the cafes and the typical kind of work you get. And I'm satiated with locating architecture. I have absolutely no interest in the service part, none. Could care less about the restaurant. It's just it's something I'm doing, and I'm trying to where is architecture located in this particular world, right? And I'm fighting for what I think is our discipline. And so you're going to see kind of elements of things. And well, then we get kind of our first big work. It's a cancer center, and there was an opportunity to build this kind of object for children, and it was a part of the theater, and it represented where the building should have been because we're underground because of radiation therapy and nuclear medicine and all that. And we're starting to make things, and I'm much more focused on these things, and they're very much handmade because we recognized very early practicing out of Los Angeles that there was no the level of technology. The whole notion of craft was non-existent. You're going to get very, very crude, simplistic stuff. It's made out of wood and stucco, etc. We had absolutely no interest in that whatsoever. So we took over the making part, right? And it became very evident that we had to be responsible for that. And then I would have said, for you guys, I look back at this, and you take responsibility for your own intellectual creative capital, right? And in this world, especially in this country, which I'll get back to a couple times, you have to be kind of an activist in the realization of your ideas. Otherwise, it ain't going to happen, right? And so here we're doing, this is a shop in Seattle, and we're using the loom, and we're producing the kind of mechanism that makes an illusionary, a conceptual loom, and it's coming straight out of Diderot. And we're sucking up kind of everything at the time. In architecture, it'd be Frampton and critical regionalism. It's going to move us towards kind of ideas of a connectivity having to do with architecture and urban It's going to be Norbert Schultz and Genus Loci and the Relation Insight. It's going to be people creeping in like Octavia Paz discussing beauty as beyond the notion of utility. It's going to be completely kind of scattered, and it's we're just searching for a direction still, right? And it's been located now in these kind of intensifications that we take certain responsibility for certain territories where we can kind of unload all of our energy, right? And it's going to be very much kind of focused towards that, and it's going to become also an economic strategy. That some of these things have to be quite simple, they're inexpensive, and we're going to locate certain areas of intensity that make sense, which is later going to become strategical. That's going to happen a decade later. And then every once in a while, things stop, and I'm working on this project, which was a little house I had underneath this thing. And in the middle of this, I recognized that this was not really a potential built project, that the project was the idea, and it was the drawings. And at this point, we're aware that we've been working in a way where our drawings and the maquettes were our output of our creative capital. And we were clear about that and comfortable with that. It didn't have to always be buildings. In fact, I'm still very kind of ambivalent. There's times that I'd like to stop a project and will stop a project if it's going sideways. And I'm totally happy with the work as drawing and model, and it's my idea, and it doesn't get built. And I can move around at that level, that I'm not totally satiated with the notion of construction. It's more complicated than that. And then this one, we're starting to shift this ideas, and these things of elements were now becoming the whole building. It were 10 discarded pieces of dead tech. And we're starting to come up with a different language. It wasn't about traditional composition. It was about association of like things. And it was coming up with some different ideas of what our architecture was. And then at that point, there was kind of a shift taking place. And that we started understanding, I couldn't say what I'm going to say. I couldn't verbalize this, but it was becoming clear to us in our work that we were working with a very different notion of part whole. And if you started with Palladio, the notion of part to whole in a classical system operates under a single authority, etc. And we were now working with parts, but there were multiple parts, which came way back to the first thing I showed you, multiple forces, right? And these multiple parts were starting to make a continuity, and they were also unfinished. And I was getting extremely interested in an idea of an architecture that had its dynamicism through the unfinished and through a strange anticipation of future and a very kind of, you might say, optimistic notion that there is future, that there is a forward progress to the work. And I'm putting down kind of the first pieces. And then right after that, we got a kind of a larger project. And now, well, I've been sniffing around in New York, showed up at a Leo Castelli show, and he had this really interesting show on architects. And I became aware of a guy named Pichler, and artist/architect who's the kind of the Hayek of the Viennese guys. And he was the force that started people like Gunther Domenic and Raymond Abraham and Hollein, etc. And he was the digger. And then just parallel to the show, I'd somehow become aware of Heiser's double negative, and they're all earth structures, and I just triggered something. I realized that I had been looking more at people like Stirling and their additive characters, very late Victorian characters, and I started to get interested in subtraction, and that led me back to Corbusier. And we talked about it with somebody today, a subtractive mode versus an additive mode, and the digging was part of that. And I think at that time I met Lebius, and I got fascinated with because as an architect, you just make stuff and put it on top of the earth. And all of a sudden I realized that the notion is you're kind of digging and carving and space making, and it's prior and it's more primitive than making the things on top of the earth. And there's going to be this kind of connection. And it started with this house, but we got the building, and then on the corner, I'm modeling, making drawings, conceptual drawings that are about, in this case, rhythmic events that are organizing a large site. And now I'm very much connected to all the earth guys. I'm reading Richardson and I'm reading all those characters. And but I have a client that wants a villa. I couldn't. It's hard to get him interested in carving spaces, and so it's a hybrid. And so there'd be no real explanation of this project. It comes out of a negotiation, which is extremely kind of complicated, private, and kind of meaningless to anybody else, really, other than it's hybridized. And then, again, referring to you guys, what you're going to do maybe 10 years into your practice or into the next stage of your profession, you start doing big things as competitions before you can get them, right? And you know you're not going to get them, and so don't get worried about it when you lose number 10 or 13 or 14. That's normal, right? That's what you're going to do. And we're starting to do competitions, and we got invited to this one that's a theater in Los Angeles. And certain things happened. It had a traditional 120-foot fly, and it had a 30-foot height limit. And you just, now there's all kinds of kind of pragmatic stuff that touches conceptual stuff. And we're going, that's interesting, because you can't get a 120-foot fly with a 30-foot height limit. So it goes down. Well, then things are going, Earth, ground, program, and you're just starting to make connections that happen in a somewhat haphazard way that you can't plan, right? It's just, you just wake up every morning and go to work and face the problem, and things just happen, right? And it's the way it should be. And then with this one, they asked for a landscape architect and an artist. And we're, at this point, in the 70s and 80s, you could give lectures and always say fuck, which I do. And you could be a bad boy playfully. And you could, it was doable. It was possible in that period of time. In the 60s, and so this is nothing new. We lived in a certain kind of era. And if you really think about it, I'm looking at you, it was kind of amazing. When you think of electric guitar, yeah, you. Yeah, when you talked to the jury, I remember that. The Stratocaster, the electric guitar, was invented in the middle, late 40s, right? So when Jimi Hendrix is playing with 5 strings, left-handed, backwards, he's got this kind of instrument in front of him. And by then, they had got all this kind of stuff on the floor. It can kind of do all kinds of things with these sounds, right? Just coming out of this thing. And it was amazing. I happened to be at a time of history where film, art exploded. And it was, did anybody listen to Laurie Anderson? The young ones. Students? Oh, you got to spread out, guys. Painting was no longer relevant. You have to be a Gerhard Richter to actually struggle and prove the painting's relevant. She was standing on a cube of ice playing her tricked out violin and doing her storytelling. And the world was changing. The whole notion that what we defined as art was changing. And music was changing. And you could have 2 girlfriends a day. And a lot of things were happening. They were a lot of fun. And then this year, anyway, we hooked up with, and you start, when you leave here again and you make choices, my experience has been, maybe you'll find it different, you go down a path and the paths don't cross again. You are making a choice in your life, and it's very difficult to make a shift in that choice. You're going to go down this path, and it leads you to more of that path. And it has nothing to do with, yes, I have to pay the rent. Everybody has that problem, not an excuse, right? It depends, again, on this kind of your own barometer, art form over here and the survival and the pragmatic form over here, because you're going to start meeting people, and there's these different gangs. Architecture is a very broad kind of discipline. Anyway, in teaching and hanging out and making certain interests in architecture, you meet people, and I met Wolf Fricks of Coup-Famablau, and he showed up in LA and was trying to get a little house, and this is when he had no work. He was trying to get a house in Los Angeles we never got. And we met, and he was the artist and put this big piece across. And it was, again, this is an amazing learning experience, because we're making something I thought it was kind of disciplined, et cetera. And Wolf, he's really a bad boy. He just he cut it right across the most important part of your architecture and just slice it, tear it up. And that's what he does for a living, right? And he uses a certain kind of energy that has to do with some sort of an intersection, some sort of a disturbance of something, right? That finally becomes his work. And then again, we're doing competitions. We're involved in the American Tech in Berlin. And again, my generation and yours now is solid. You guys are international. Your competition is the world. And nothing to do with the U.S. That's all at all, right? And you're going into the world that you're going to be published. Information is global, right? And it's digital. And you're going to look at people and they have nothing to do with your neighborhood. It has to do with the world. And you're going to be in part of this world. Because we're now in Berlin. And again, we're in a competition. Obviously didn't win it. And, but we're doing the test runs. We're learning kind of how to do these larger, more complex projects. And we're learning it administratively also. In office now, you've got 6 people you're directing. And I have to figure out how do I get this work done in 6 weeks and get it out the door and pay for it and et cetera, right? And still stay alive, right? And you want to win it, of course. You're trying to do the best you can. And then we got very lucky and we got our first kind of job in the States, which was the school at Diamond Bar. And at this point, their office is changing a bit. And I've gone through some other work, and this is the beginning, early 90s. And we had done some work in Japan, which I haven't shown here, that was getting us kind of ready for this. And then 90s came and the office disappeared. It was one of any of the old guys here now. And I ended up with, I had kind of a real office then. And we went down to nothing again. And we got this project. And a really unusual client. And you look back and go, just lucky. It's a school district, and it'd be totally crazy. I had one superintendent that happened to like us, and they wanted the community wanted a pseudo-Spanish guacamole stucco with tile roofs on it. And I remember we presented it. It was so fascinating. The faculty didn't like it, and they thought we overshot school. And I remember coming back with my partner at the time going, you know what they told us? We overshot them. That was the problem, the faculty. Which, by the way, I learned quite early on that our client is between 3 and somewhere like 13, 14, or 15. After that, it's downhill. They still see the world in completely fresh terms. And after that, it starts going, it has more to do with status than enhancement. And it's about Gucci and not actually looking and seeing something. But an interesting project. And then right after that, and I was being told by various friends of mine that our first work would be in Europe and not the States. We won a competition, and we're just starting to use the computer. And at this time, we're really engaged in the part-whole thing, and we're making things out of connecting. And I'm interested not in the object, but in the connection of the objects and the spontaneous energy and the kind of invention as you push things together. And it's all about the space between, and it's about relationships, not the thing itself. And it's getting clearer and clearer as we're doing this. And this is now a project large enough where it's urban that our little practice runs I'm showing you, and I'd be showing you a 10th of what we've done. I've just picked out a few things. By the way, intensity would be another conversation, because I'm showing you 1/100th, maybe, of the kind of work we've done. And the intensity is really important. You're working at a pace just to keep yourself going, right? And there's a lot of stuff happening between projects that don't seem to connect, that actually do connect. And that pace is really important. And now the computer is doing some things that these drawings were taking quite a while. And we spent a lot of time drawing. And you used to take responsibility. Again, now I'm speaking to nobody here. This is the school. Every line we took responsibility for. And today you had a computer and you get 2,000 lines in a nanosecond. And it's a completely different thing. It's now understanding the tool that's giving you this more than, right? Because I had to draw each line at a time, so I took responsibility for it. But we're starting to develop complexity here with a computer that gave us this and this. And then this is interesting, because here now on the side, I'm still sketching, I'm still drawing, and we're still drawing quasi plan section. And again, I'm in Austria, southern Austria, a bank. Conservative country, conservative part of a country, a bank. They leave you alone. You budget, function, urban issues. If it's the artistic part, the subjective part is yours. They wouldn't touch you, right? Complete different attitude. And I got very spoiled. And then these little drawings on the side, we're now developing 3D ideas. And I remember like it was yesterday when I saw these, I'm looking over somebody's desk and going, I'm done for. We're going to change totally. it's absolutely not possible that I'm going to draw things that lead me to things I'm interested in. And what I'm really interested in, like the sciences, is experimenting with something that you don't know what the solution is. And at that time, my mantra was Kahn, and I was looking at Kahn in terms of a priori thinking. You think, you conceive of something, and you draw it, and you can only draw what's historical behind you. And I had no interest in that whatever. I was looking for things I could work with, but I didn't know what the solution was. It just kept me up at night. It kept me alive in a way, right? And this is what was happening here. And that was going to change the office, because that was going to become institutionalized within 2 years. And I would have said today, I overstate things rhetorically, so don't worry about it. Because I'm going to say, you're going to work three-dimensionally, and that's the only way you're going to work in today's world to kind of operate at a certain level. And that you will end up doing that regardless of when you start doing it, because it's the delivery system today that allows you I'm going to talk about it later, a huge amount of integrative stuff at the same time. And then the same client hired us in Udine, Italy, and we're now looking with landscape, building, and infrastructure, and we're starting to understand this layering of ground is an opportunity to make new space. Saw it twice today, you guys that went under, and we started realizing that you could start layering ground like lasagna. You can occupy land territory, and it was again kind of a part of kind of a learning, and it was very much about a comprehensive system of understanding a complex organization that's more and more urban, where we can look at things and we can wayfind and then make something extremely comprehensible that's quite complex. And then again, connected to your path out of here, ex-student that worked in the office that then goes back to Madrid and starts the firm and then invites us to a competition for workers' housing. And we started with a critique of the single block as an institutional model and went to work on something that was more connected to a Moorish Middle Eastern model, which was part of the occupation in the 13th century of Spain. And we were looking at Tehran, and we were looking at Marrakesh, et cetera, et cetera. And we were looking at community making, which was about a pedestrian scale and about making private spaces that made communities for housing. And we're now clearly kind of interested in a certain level of complexity that with the connection of the part whole, that we're attacking self-similarity and the singularity of a module, et cetera. And we're looking for the complexity that you would find in a city, an historical city over time, right? Because I've always been more interested in the found spaces and in alleys and the things that happen as cities grow. And that's what gives them character, not the grid or the line or the very few mechanisms we have urbanistically as architects. And out of that came this. And half of the units got outside courts, and those are the ones that had families and children, and we kind of expanded the space by 50%. And again, we made a very, very different model than the housing block. And it prioritized exterior space, the climate in this portion of Madrid, et cetera, et cetera. And it had to do with the scale that we thought was much more appropriate for housing, vis-a-vis the self-similarity of the 10-story tower, right? And it was going to include landscape and a series of courts and social spaces that there were 15 to 20 units around each of the courts, and you came up from the car, and we were forming sub-neighborhoods, et cetera, that had to do with the nature of the project. And then with this, again, you're moving from very different projects, and would go to wherever I was discussing about being more strategical. You've got to have a broader idea what the project is. So we're looking at schools, and I'm saying, let's start with what a school is before we start about the formation of it in architectural terms. And you'd want to just ask some questions, kind of where we are at a particular time. And it makes it so interesting for you because you're constantly learning stuff as you get all these different projects. And then we got kind of our first kind of larger project in Los Angeles where we wanted a competition. And it was built for nothing. And it's about infrastructure, and it's about they had the roadways, the freeways, just the Caltrans building. And I made it at a courtyard, and it was very much in a very conventional way, kind of an urban project in a very unurban city. And we made a space that was very active, knowing that it could be more. The architecture had to bring the energy. It'd be less people for many years. We were producing a space prior to the desire for the space, much less the need for it. and it's very Los Angeles, and that the skin is going to be performative for energy, and it's going to be part of a cinema experience. Whoop. And then right after that, we started a series of projects with the government and made kind of a strange leap because we're the bad boy kind of radical guys out here. And all of a sudden we're doing kind of buildings that couldn't be more kind of institutional and in terms of what most architects kind of operate on. And we got this thing and it changed the firm again. And it was highly performative. It's the first tall building with no air conditioning. And it had a broad kind of social structure that it was about communication, dialogue, et cetera, within large, multi-layered institutions that tend to balkanize in terms of the departments. And it was socially kind of correct, or we were interested in San Francisco, and especially coming from LA and the dialogue between San Francisco, which is a Boston, and an LA, which is a whatever. And it's a Houston or Dallas, or whatever you want to say, but it's a suburban model and an anti-urban model. And we were interested in the West Pocket Park, and we put one on the 11th floor, and we're interested in the lower floor, and we put a daycare center instead of a gallery, because 55% of the women here, 55% of the people were women, and out of those, huge amount had families. And again, we produced this strategically, and it was a shift for the firm. And it was a movement into something that was tactical from design, and it changed the firm. It never went back, right? And the building, the aesthetics was now kind of just kind of an end product. There wasn't that much focus on. It came out of the various performances, and it was getting much more natural. We didn't have to kind of highlight that kind of aspect of the project. And yet it has all the components of the randomness, the multiple systems that make up the language, et cetera, et cetera. And it's and it had a space which was had to have a significance and an authority and an iconic value that represented the major federal building in San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. And it was somewhat purposely tough and brutal. And at this point, we were also aware that the aesthetics was starting to shift in terms of the conversation. As we were doing larger projects, we were getting more opinions about liking it or not liking it. And social spaces, again, all about meeting. Again, the pieces that come out of that piazza, you're sitting out and you're part of a dialogue. And again, the energy. And we're getting people that didn't like the work, or they thought it was whatever, it was kind of ugly or brutal. And now I'm going to go way back to the first slide I show. Could care less. I have no interest at all. I'm interested in something compelling. And it'd be normal. Some people are going to like it, and some people are not going to like it, like the clothes we wear. Irrelevant. And in fact, it'd be hurtful if there was no opinion. That'd be the tough one, right? Could care less. And it takes a stance, right? And if you take a stance, you have to be able to take the hit. You have to understand that it's not going to please everybody. And the whole notion in our profession, I have to say, I think is one of its biggest problems is that it wants to please a client. And it's an absolutely absurd kind of an idea. I have a hard time figuring out if I like it. Why would I worry about anybody else likes it, right? It's totally absurd. And please who, right? It's going to take you to, well, television is good right now. It would have taken you to television a decade ago. That if you ask the client what they want and they give it to you, they're also going to hate it because it's going to be crap, right? Because they know nothing about it. So why would you ask them about it, right? Anyway, that's coming in this whole thing. And we're getting more connected to being able to give a narrative and give this. So in that building, when we were opening this, I was with Nancy Pelosi, and she gets a little talk at her offices here, and I get to talk. She hates it. She wanted a Victorian building, and I go, Nancy, kind of hard to make a Victorian building that's 13 stories tall and ends up with a piazza. And I explained the narrative. Public space that's generating mission district, a building that promotes dialogue and conversation, which had to do a skip stop library and tea services and daycare center and a piazza where people get married, energy neutral, energy efficient. It powers 600 homes, the Delta. What do you think? She was fine. Still didn't like the way it looked. And then I'm not going, oh, that metal's really ugly. I said, no, I see, it's got to be 50% transparent. It's taking out the heat. It's got to be able to see through it. It moderates light, and it comes from performance. And be asking somebody if they like the lunar landing module doesn't matter. I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful because I think it's compelling. I'm not sure what beauty is, by the way. I'm not sure what it is. What standard you call beauty. And by the way, when I look at the audience, like all audiences in this country, we live in a heterogeneous, pluralistic culture, and beauty is culturally specific. So it's hopeless. Whose culture, beauty are we talking about, right? Anyway, I ran that one to the ground, right? And then we're working reiteratively, right? And we're now working with more and more advanced tools. It's ZCorp Models, and this was with a kind of a very difficult client, and Andrea Leary knows this one, a judge who wanted that and took me to see the Gas Gilbert as if I hadn't seen it. And I had to remind him that it's actually a steel frame building with modern HVAC systems, and it's actually a horrible copy of a classical building. It's absurd. And I gave him this. It took a year and a half. And we went through a system of logic, and it came through an idea of the skins, and it was going to originally have the Constitution, the Bill of Rights written on it. We couldn't get that done. And that's him looking at it. And we built this, and it's open-ended. And now some of these projects are taking into some really interesting territory. This is a highly symbolic project, and I'm dealing with somebody that's a constitutionalist and sees it as a fixed document. And he's dealing with an architect that sees it provisionally as a document that's continually evolving to deal with an existing, the contingency of an existing culture. And it's going to be open-ended, me. And it's going to be fixed, him, right? And we go at it. It was a fascinating conversation. And luckily, what should be happening maybe right now in our federal government, you finally deal with it humanistically. And luckily, we had a love of good Bordeaux wine, and that saved the day, right? And we could spend hours drinking a nice Pouliac and work things out. And it's a negotiation of something. Because at the same time, I can talk about this in classical terms. And we spent weeks on the bench in the courtroom and can connect it to a very Middle Western puritanical notion of discomfort and uprightness, et cetera, et cetera. And I could on areas that sits on a piano noble that's parallel to the Supreme Court. And we found a middle ground. And then we're working with Caltech. And we just have opportunities now. And now you're going to go back to the work you're doing right now. And you're going to find that you can do some kind of interesting things. And we're looking at a collective space, and we're using particle physics and pieces of ideas of atomic movement and cloud chambers, et cetera, and telescopes. And we're going to make the space, which is totally unique to these astrophysicists. 6 of them are Nobel people. And we're just kind of inventing stuff. And we're now in this kind of lovely territory that we have kind of a piece of this building that you can just explore and make totally unique to this building. It's only connected to this one piece of work. And then just right after that came Cooper Union, and it's somewhat idiosyncratic. And again, this is a building, and maybe especially this slide, really kind of odd. And I would say I kind of agree, kind of clumsy and strange looking thing. And I kind of like that. And it just kind of happened, and I'm okay with it. And but I like character faces too, more than I like pretty faces a lot of times. And I like unique things, and everything doesn't have to be under a single standard. And it just kind of happens because there's a narrative to this that I can go through. And the bottom is active and energetic, and it's part of the New York streetscape. And again, it's part of expanding the creative capital of the school into the street, which is New York. And it had a very particular notion of a single space that was the project. It's a box, and it's built for nothing. And it has a single space, and that space is the connective tissue. And Cooper Union is about the connection of engineers, artists, and architects. And this was coming very much from some of the work we did in San Francisco. And it was about a connective tissue and about advancing dialogue and conversation, which is the essence of an environment. And we made something that was incredibly specific. At the same time, you had to see through it because it was about connectivity. But from the bottom, it had to have spatial definition. And it was going to be, again, completely unique. And it was a project. Person that worked on this worked for a year on this. And we also had to figure out how to make it, right? And it was going to be an expansion of inside and outside. And we're using the Met, we're using the New York Library, we're using the stairs, the social conduit. And as you look through the space, you're constantly seeing, I mentioned to somebody today, I'm not sure which one of you guys, the Whole Line Project, right there, the Whole Line Project in Frankfurt. This kind of comes from, because now as you start looking at the stuff, I'm not sure if we ever invented anything. I steal everything. You just see stuff and you connect. Oh, I was really fascinated, that little triangular thing. And you see somebody move that doesn't look like they should move there. And all of a sudden a person moves there and you go, oh, whoop, there's a connection. And you look over here and there's another little weird space and they're moving. And it's this really interesting kind of a very kind of dynamic kind of environment that isn't predictable, right? And again, these are the things, as you look more and know more about buildings, these things just fit in at the right time and they become apparent to you. I should go back. Yeah, the guardrail. I joke with friends, it's a test where the guardrail comes from. And you have to say Sterling at Stuttgart. It's this big. Completely took it from Stuttgart. Saw that railing, was there, this big. It forms kind of an idea. It's a Renaissance idea. The scale of the detail is the scale of the space, right? And then the real handrail is another one you touch if you need it. And I've got it here. Every once in a while it shows up, but I use it a little differently because now I'm not Sterling and it's a little more fluid and it does things. But I wanted something that held your eye. It kind of moved you up the space and it had to be this big and not this big, right? But it came directly from Jim Sterling. And then we won a competition in Paris, which is really, really a fabulous job. This is not going to get built. And really complex site. And now the homework we did for looking at unique projects for unique sites is paying off because you couldn't put a standard building here and you couldn't retrofit it. You had to think about this as a unique thing. And it was really funny. This is one where I had friends call me saying, Tom, we got you on our radar on this one. You're going to win it. Because I was already kind of known at this point for making buildings that use uniquenesses of things and use that as a plus. And I actually got that from the 1 year I worked at Gruen from Cesar Pelli. And Pelli, one of his mantras was every problem is a plus and is a generator of a new solution. And you're looking particularly, the worse the problems, the better, right? They lead you someplace, right? And what you need is the problem, right? And I think it's dead on. And then we're also looking at, and I didn't show you some other stuff, something that's dynamic. As you look at it, it's not extruded. So you keep getting different views of different things as you see it. And if you saw the site, it becomes even more kind of powerful as it relates to the site. And then this kind of huge interior in San Francisco, but we built the interior of the Eiffel Tower. And it's energy efficient. And again, we're keeping San Francisco, but making something much more lyrical. And now that maybe the toughness of San Francisco, we're aware that we want to make something softer. We're in Paris. I'm probably out looking at what's his name's Moulin Rouge or something, and trying to get myself in that kind of mood. And it needs to have that. And the lighting was going to be in a way a sketch of the building in terms of its form. And now the kind of current work, and if things go right, I barely have to say anything because this is going to be, you've looked at kind of a foundation. And this is going to start, 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And I'm starting to draw again. And I'm starting to draw three-dimensionally like the early ones were reliefs. They're part model, part drawing, and I'm carving, and I'm using it three-dimensionally. But there's 15 years between. I kind of stopped, and I built the firm you looked at, and I'm building. I'm now gone from making models and drawings as my work to making buildings for 15 years. And now I'm going back, and I'm getting bored. And I'm like going, time to go back. And this is my research. This is how I think. I think through the drawings or a method of thinking, right? And it's where it triggers stuff, and it triggers things that are both about organizational ideas and language, right? And I'm looking for still this combinatorial relationship between things, but it's getting a little more advanced. And it's getting more and more interested in chance. And of course, chance is the 20th century project in art and architecture, right? Starting with Duchamp, right? And I'm going to get interested in the notion of willfulness and chance. You're both controlling something, but it's happening beyond your potential of understanding all of the consequences that are taking place. And it's happening in a computer. And the first pieces that are developed are in model form, and the drawings are analytical. They come from that. They're not first. The drawings come second. And then the pieces all come from the exact same language. So everything you're looking at in this series is 4 systems: an XY line, a Z line, an object, and a surface. So they all share the exact same DNA. And I'm looking at the degree of difference, the differentiation I can get out of this very simple language, which is going to be very much important to how I approach urban design, and it's going to have effect on a work I'm going to show you in a minute. And then I'm taking these drawings, and I'm now using that in a more direct way for the first ideas of a building. And this is going to be a campus in Shanghai. And I purposely showed the drawings and this first sketch of what is, it's just about half a kilometer long, and it's a small village, you might say, and it's a campus, meaning it just has stuff, auditoriums and libraries and offices and blah, 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 right? It just has a diverse amount of stuff in it, which would be parallel to the city. And then I'm somewhat rationalizing that as it forms into a beginning of a language of architecture. And I still have the language. And they all have particular roles, both local and global. And they start associating. Again, we discussed that with your work today. You're making associations between this diverse language and things that align with necessity programmatically, right? And so you can start associating a library or a meeting space with one language, and a connection of offices or classrooms in another, et cetera, right? And then there's a surface, and the surface plays a global role. It's going to stitch the whole thing together, and it's going to become part of a continuity. And then it turns into a plan. And again, that goes directly to that, right? And what I'm looking for now is an organization which is continuously differentiated. That as you move through it, it continually changes, like a walk through a forest, but it's organized, it's coherent, and you can recognize it as coherent, right? It's not disorganized, right? And it's going to be about the ground, and it's going to be about pursuing interests that I've had, et cetera, that it's going to associate with an idea of landscape and with an urban idea. And it's going to get kind of so soft that I'm getting worried that I'm kind of backing off architecture so much that it has some counterpoint. And it'd be as if you're using music as an analogy. It'd be more void and sound bites, the organization of sound and void. I just was listening to a concert of Tchaikovsky's piano, the third concerto piano. And if you know it, the void is just amazing. And it's very energetic. It's the one that leads you right to jazz, right? And in this one, it's the opposite. I needed something more aggressive because the whole thing became so silent. And there's a piece that cantilevers 70 meters. It's 200 feet plus minus. It comes out over the site. And this is another complete discussion. Would take another lecture. What's taking place with the 3D environment is just getting more and more integrative. And you're going to either maybe touch this here, or it's going to touch you when you walk out the door. And that more and more information is finding its way early on. And this is a structural model. And I'm sitting with Overup very early in the process. And he or she has a Texas Instrument computer. And we're spending 4 hours, and we can frame this thing and model it coming out of our office. And I'm doing this at the end of schematics, and I'm doing it because I have to prove to the client that I can build this building. I'm not going to allow to go ahead. It is within budget. It is possible, right? Blah, blah, blah. And the good news is we have these processes. And I'm building that, and we're looking at something that has over 10,000 individual parts. Not one of them is the same. Doesn't matter. It's cut it's cut on a mill. It's computer operated. Computer could care less. It's just a series of X's and O's, right? And as far as I know, they maybe didn't tell me. I don't think there was one mistake. It came from Beijing to Shanghai, 1,000 miles. Maybe they didn't tell me and there were some mistakes, but it was seamless. And these forms, again, we can make them now. We can take complex forms, and we have the technology in the studio to be able to resolve our own problems and to make the things we invent, right? And again, you guys, you're going to be light years ahead, because this is where you're starting. I'm in 4 decades of work now, 3.5, right? And this is where you're beginning, and we get this. And everything this landscape is building underneath. So I'm looking for now a new model of landscape and building, or hybridized into some new thing, and a new morphology. And of course, with landscape, you have a dynamic thing. It's nice. It changes color. It changes composition. You can do things you can't do. And I'm bringing in the farm, which I'm now working on. I'm integrating the farm in the city, and I'm fascinated at bringing in the outside to the inside. We're working with hydroponics, and we're working with a couple of projects. We're literally going to bring the farm into the city, and it'll be a new model. And then again, this simple language that came directly from the drawings I'm showing you, that gives me this huge diversity of what the X, Y, Z objects and surfaces. So that keeps transforming as you're walking through the space. You're inside, you're outside. It's a walk through a village, and it keeps changing, right? I'm mimicking the diversity that comes out of a town over hundreds of years. I'm looking at San Gimignano. I'm looking at something I admire in an Italian hill town, right? And I'm getting all kinds of things in between. Residual spaces that just come up by accident. And here it is again, and it just takes place out of this strategy. And the residual space in many cases becomes the most interesting. And I can make public space, again, it has the capability of operating interior, exterior, etc. And there's these weird things that happen. And now I'm in China. And again, you guys are young, and this wouldn't make any sense to you maybe, but I couldn't build this in this country to save my life. They asked me what it's for. It's to connect the two sides of the campus over the boulevard. Conceptually, that's what it's for, right? It's a $250,000 piece of stuff that comes out of there. Totally okay. Of course we're going to build it. It's a necessity to complete the campus. I would be booted out of any client I have in this country if I even talk like that, right? And then here we go. And again, we're just looking for this huge diversity, the tea room, kind of the cafe, etc. And it's this language that kind of keeps appearing, and it keeps allowing you the understanding of the diversity, and it's always connected to site. So everything is about nature and building, and you're always kind of hyper aware. This is the boardroom for the guy that runs this place, and God, I could tell you stories forever. Fascinating working in this country. A billionaire who's been in jail 3 times, and it's a hotel complex, a living complex, and sports facility, which includes a pool, etc. And then just quickly, we're now kind of shifting. We're building site, so we're starting to build the site before the building, and it has very much to do with working in this country, in the LA. Not this place, maybe. Again, with 2 projects today that it's the Dallases and the Houstons and the LAs where the projects aren't really aligned in any classical sense. They belong in a piazza. They belong in some important site, and they don't belong there. And so we're constructing site, and you'll see we're using kind of attitudes to that, and it goes from an abstract idea into a plan. And now again, it's meshing with very pragmatic realities. And that you're going to find in a lot of public buildings, especially museums. This is a Museum of Science and Nature in Dallas, that everything wants to be in the first floor. So we invented 2 first floors that you come in this way, exactly like whoever's project I saw today. We went under and over. There were 2 of them, right? Yeah, yours. The woman right next to you. Okay. Right? And it becomes incredibly interesting because you give you a smaller kind of object on top, like your project, right? And it gives you, everything wants to be accessible. So it's the cafe, it's the main lobby, it's the library, It's the theater, on and on, right? And it becomes a connection between an idea of site and building site. Doesn't exist. You construct the site and program. It gives you this. And again, very much it's about nature, it's about environment. And then I'm going to take 200 feet and down, and we're using a kind of a quasi Guggenheim. We're trying to make it work. And then as you get to the top, you peek out, and we're making the connection. And we're not in the city, and we should be in the city, and we're across the freeway. So when you get to the top of it, we oriented the building so you're still in the city, you're engaged in the city, and the notion is that this is what it belongs. You're in a major institution, right? But we can do it in psychological terms instead of physical terms. And strangely enough, people get it. I was really interested. This has been up now for 5 years, and we've been getting actually kind of really interesting response that people do. They come up here, and it's kind of a ticket. It's Pompidou, no question about it. And I spent 4 summers there watching it go up. I was totally preoccupied with it as a social, cultural project as much as the engineering is Roger's thing and not my thing. But the idea of it was so powerful, and the notion that they're bringing non-art people to the building that would later return to the supermarket and now become high art people. It was an educational facility. It was just fascinating. And then we're building. And again, this is going to take you all the way back to me in the shop. It's part of the studio. We make stuff, right? And we're in Gates construction. Reverse. We've prototyped this. We've made the pieces in the office. We're now at Gates making the pieces. We're testing them. And we're at a point where we can tell you how big the panel is. And we can design a panel, and every panel will be different. Each one will be unique. It's handmade, right? But we can tell you how big it is in terms of the size of crane that lifts it and what the points are. And we have a crane that's the affordable crane versus the next big crane, et cetera. And we're totally taking responsibility for making something and putting it on the wall. And in this case, we made it for $40 a square foot. And that allowed us to do all kinds of other stuff. I don't have the slide I want. Curved Pilkington glass that's 22 feet high and things that are extremely expensive. So people think this building is $1,000 a foot. That's $400. We had no budget at all. And we can make now these complex pieces that I can tell you 80% are flat and made on a certain technology and 20% are more complicated. And this also now completely changed the office. This is 5 years ago. They advertised this project in an architectural record. We were 6 months away from opening the building, and they're selling our product. And my wife, who's an MBA, of course, jokes with me and said, "Tom, you of course have a patent on this project." No, I ain't good. But again, you guys, we're one of the only professions in the world. If you talk to an Elon Musk, he would think you're just idiots, honestly, right? That you make stuff, and I'm going to now get a check in the mail for 15 years as they sell this stuff, the way it should be. You invented something, you invented it, you put your energy into it, you made nothing, you made a normal fee out of it, and you did it because you were interested in building a building at a certain quality. Come on. Anybody in the normal world would be part of that kind of conversation, right? And you would share in the rewards for that. And again, a whole bunch of you are going to be in this direction because it's absolutely kind of the future. And then here we are, and I'll just get to this is the Emerson School around the corner. Won a competition to do this. Boston, well-known theater schools, you know. They're coming to LA. And we actually had something to do with selection of the site. Let's see if I have it. And Sunset Boulevard, and you're facing the Hollywood sign, and we were part of that going, okay, again, I've lived here for a year, and I know the place a little bit. And we're going, oh, how perfect. Students come here for 1 year, they do an internship, and they live here, and they study here. And it was going, this is the absolute perfect LA quintessential site. And again, I'm fascinated by the differential because I've lived here a bit, and I've lived in the East Coast. To me, Boston and LA are the two total extremes in this country, are the two city types. And we could, again, go for hours just on the cultural difference of these two places. I'm staying at a hotel, by the way, where I was told I had to have a tie and a jacket and shoes. I don't know what I'll do, but I'm going barefoot. And I came from Harvard that you had to have a tie in the Harvard Club in New York on Saturday morning. And we're Silicon Valley hoodies and beat-out jeans. And it's Boston's still in the old school. And today, I don't know about you guys, my students are all looking at the Zuckerberg and the D School, and they all look like shit purposely. And they all expect to be millionaires at 35. There's a whole different thing going on, which I'm fascinated with. No business cards. No, it's a completely relaxed kind of notion, but they're smart. They're bright, right? And you meet the Google guys, and we're working with them at the Bloomberg project. It's just fascinating what's going on, which I find extremely interesting and carrying over to the architectural education. And here we are, and we're making public space. And you're going to see stuff here, again, directly from Cooper, kind of ideas we have. But here, what I was interested in is building interstitial congested space. And I wanted to produce this very urban, congested territory between things, right? As you entered this thing, and it was also a set, because we had visited Warner Brothers. We made a big room and put this piece in it. And then, again, what a bunch of you guys are going to do, we made these shapes, and we rationalized them. And so here we are in the office, kind of figuring out how to make it, and taking responsibility in a very specific way to make this thing. And here we are in Zaner in Kansas City with the pieces. And this is the inexpensive way to make it in a shop. It's going to be kind of lifted on and placed, and it's closer to the way I make an airplane than a building. And it was done economically. Another building we built for $450, $500. And I've got a crew there that did this. They took responsibility, and they're working with a manufacturer like this and allowed us to do that. And then the same thing with the skin, much simpler. We're making kind of a language that fits on a 4x8 sheet of aluminum. And you've got to use all the material because we're out of money. And I want all the material on the building. So we go back and we keep tuning it where there's not 1 ounce of waste. And the shape comes from the cutting of a fabric. And we're now tailors or we're fashion designers or something working the same way. And we're developing a language that's going to be 3-dimensional. And we're making a map. So these various, the 16 different parts, this is the roadmap for the construction crew. It shows them where they put them up on a matrix, right? And then we get this. And then we're using some of that same stuff with Cornell for the Gates building at Cornell. And we got to build a building that wasn't a brick. And we're building at a very conventional campus, and they wanted a 21st century building. And that's when I get a jingle. If somebody calls me, that's our opportunity. And a great kind of client. And again, it has all these kind of things. Very, very simple building. Very, very straightforward building. And then, but I am with just a few kind of odd things. We're building a tall building in Shenzhen. And it's a very tall building. It's a 350-meter tower. And I'm looking for kind of opportunities. And we're modeling and we're looking at it again in very specific terms. That's in our studio again. And it's going to have a base, which again kind of leads into the ground and gives us kind of more territory. And in this case, it's for commercial and for 5 floors of kind of activity that comes with the program. And then as we're going to go up, it's going to be differentiated and it's going to come directly from FAR. But some things I didn't show you that we're looking for differentiation, nothing's extruded. It's always 3-dimensional. And it ended up being kind of an interesting model economically because you get different floor plates. And that's actually what they want. They don't want, in all cases, the same floor plate. They want some large and small and varied. And then we had kind of a secondary kind of way of connecting floors. So you could take 3 floors or 2.5 floors. But then what it did, by remoting the elevators, you had this huge space with nothing in the middle. And so you could be in this building and you get 270, 300-degree views. And it's just amazing. And a big, big kind of single plate. And then it goes up. And then again, the base, the entry to the commercial, the entry to the housing. And then you're walking across a 50-foot glass bridge from the lift to the working space. So as you go to work in the morning, you're coming across this void and you're looking, it's 80, top one is 80 stories. you're looking across the city and you're part of the urban character of Shenzhen. And you're looking up between, as you look up through the glass, there's this incredible kind of maze of connecting corridors that go up, right? And here it is under construction. So there is the separate piece, right, that you're going to be walking across. And that's what you're going to look at. You're going to be looking out through the city as you cross one of these bridges. And you're going to be immediately connected to the urban kind of environment as you move to work or as you leave in the evening. And then a project in Seoul, a research center. And again, it's going to lead to kind of construction. Kind of a big complex, a very simple one. The back of it is very straightforward. It's a research center, and the front of it is all the social spaces. And it's again, like San Francisco and like Florida would have been, it has a very, very singular, major open space. I've put Notre Dame on top of this. It's just slightly larger than Notre Dame, and a complex kind of section that gives you the connectivity of all the social spaces and the ancillary spaces. And like all of our work, it's going to have a second skin, which is the jacket or the clothing that's going to deal with an environmental landscape, that's going to focus light. But we're moving in a different direction now, in that we've kind of finished with the perforated metal and the various metal things, et cetera. And we're on fourth, fifth generation, and we're trying to find something that has a very different kind of language. And we're coming up with this idea of these very large-scale elements, and they're going to be GFRP, and they're going to be a very kind of high technology material language that's going to give us a three-dimensional possibility. Again, this is coming out of our shop. And here they are in Korea making the molds. And here are the elements in the shop that are prototypes. And now we built a prototype wall, right? We're prototyping it. We're making kind of last-minute changes, et cetera. And I don't have the finished pictures. It'll be on the surface if I come back here in 3 months. And then a large project in Italy that's a campus for ENI, which is the petroleum company in Milano, that again is experimenting with surfaces. It's a campus. It's about the connective tissue. We won the competition. We were the only one that actually made public space, and the whole discussion was about public space. And in that sense, of a totally conventional means, right? And everybody else built towers and objects, et cetera. And we focused on the public, and then we used geology and the whole essence of oil as an idea for the developing the facade. And then finally, we just started construction on a TGV station, fast train, high-speed train in Vigo, Spain. And it's a really fascinating project. It has a piazza on top. It's 1 kilometer long, just a huge space. And it's at the escarpment. So it's a great, great site. And then inside it is commercial. On top of it is this public space, and a really, really kind of interesting project. And again, the terminal as you go into the ground. And then we still, we draw for ourselves. Some of this stuff, most of the stuff for clients I don't even show you. I wouldn't show anybody. We show it to the client and throw it away. We divide it's intentional, right? We draw things that we need to draw for our own creative instincts. And then we show clients, and again, it's much more strategical. And again, if I could talk about, we're doing the embassy in Beirut right now. Never once have I talked design. And I have a group of 35 people that worked on that job. We just finished. They just started construction. And they probably averaged 28 years old. And I remember in the very beginning, I got them together and say, this might seem weird to you, all coming out of schools and all being energetic about designing. We'll never once talk about design to the client. We'll talk about various performances that they're interested in. The design is what we talk about amongst ourselves, right? And it becomes much, much more tactical in terms of how you approach these things. And then finally, this one last, if I had another hour and you wouldn't boot me out of here, we would go into urban design, because this is going to be an absolute connection to larger scale work having to do with the combinatory language and the complexity and the multiple organizations. And just this is very demonstrative. So I'm ending with this because it also makes a connection to the certain language that you saw in Shanghai, the Giant Center, the Research Center, And it's an island off of Henan, China, and it was a competition. And we're approaching it performatively, so we can say that this island will be made up of 94% landscape, and we can talk about that in terms of, again, like Shanghai, what is augmented and used as program, and what is pure landscape. And we could talk about various notions of FAR and how you resolve program on the site and differentiate that. And again, it's totally flexible. They can come back and give us 5 different versions. I don't care. It's irrelevant. We have a strategy that's absolutely flexible. It's not based on any single idea. It's operating off of multiple forces. And again, with movement, and we can discuss huge efficiencies. So we compared this to a grid, and we could produce 30% of the original amount of stuff that leaves us investment for other parts of the project, which are more connected to human goals. And it'd be that. And then, last 2 slides, I gave this to my students, both at Penn and at UCLA, because I started getting really interested in not the language, as we ended up with a kind of a conservative scheme, but realizing how the language starts leading you to different kind of questions than you do when you're looking at it just through the logic of traditional architecture within rational terms. And then as we looked at this, and my students quickly came up with ideas where instead of building the island, they built an archipelago. And the takeaway was they're moving 1/4 the amount of Earth, and it's leaving us $150 million to invest someplace else. But it also develops a very different idea of what this island is, which is a tourist ecological island. And then again, I had another group that got interested in an infrastructural idea, and we can talk about it in other terms. And each one of them has the same program. And now, again, I'm going to end with this. It discusses the relationship between the performative kind of rational aspect of our work and the more interpretive, subjective part of the work. And both of them just lead to different potentials and possibilities. Thank you so much.
I know Thom must be tired of talking, and I know some students need to get to class, but did everyone stay for 2 questions? 2? Okay. Pick one, Karen.
Hi there. Is this on? Okay. Maybe this is just me, but I noticed a lot of similarities between the research park in Korea and the Cooper Union building. So I was wondering, how do you take the successful elements of a project that you want to keep using without sort of just recreating that same project?
And you saw the similarity in the Cologne, the Korea project.
Yeah.
And which one?
Cooper Union.
Cooper Union.
I'm not just asking about those projects, but in general, how do you balance those things?
I'm not trying to answer. I see them as and I tried to glue a story together where I see it as a single kind of project in a way with many components, but that's searching for difference. And so it's going to be always some sort of a matrix between similarity, which has to come out of the limits of my leadership and the limits of the things we're able to do, and that that become part of our history, and the desire for differentiation or for specificity with the projects. And it'll always be some sort of a balance. I don't know what to say. If I could produce more variety, I would. Is all I can tell you. That I don't have the capacity. That things do show up because you have some sort of limits in terms of your ability to produce. To be able to do that, it's just you have limits. And then you can judge the differentiation. Some people would say that all of that work is morphosis, that it still has signature, quote. And if that's true, then you're looking at the self-similarity. And you would have to find that. Because if I was skip working with the people I was talking to today, people come to my office and they'll put two things together like this. And I go, you haven't been looking at what we're doing. It always does this. Everything is free. Nothing aligns. And so you're going to, yes, that'll be a connective tissue. You see it over and over of things having their own, to me, they need room to breathe, their freedom to express themselves as an autonomous thing. And so you're going to see that autonomy, and that'll be something that glues things together in a way that makes them, right, similar. And then certain projects like towers, it's a tough one because we have two more and we just can't even find. They're so limited, especially you get the core in the middle and you got it kind of a skin, maybe a bit of a shape, but we find them. It's not a project I'm interested in. We'll probably at some point just say no, unless we need the dinero or something happens that we have to take it or something, because this is not an interesting. It's hard to get the kind of variety I'm interested in. And so in the tower I showed you, my whole interest was to be able to change the basic order of the thing, and it couldn't have the tower in the middle. And that, by the way, it's the way I won the competition. And that was a weird one. I was up against all the big boys. I was the really odd one. And it was the NBBJs and the Genslers and the KPFs and Adrian Smith. And I remember being with Adrian Smith in a presentation. And some of these things, you know you win before they tell you. I already knew I won the competition. And he's an arrogant bastard. He was sitting with me going, what are you here? What the fuck? What do you mean? And I already knew I won the competition. And we won it again in China. Couldn't possibly get that building built in this country. Twice the skin, twice the structure. You're looking at 70, 65% of the whole building, meaning it's an expensive building. And it's in a culture right now that wants to be, they're building architecture as icons of where they think they are in the 21st century. And they want to be seen, right? They're going to have ownership. And it's really interesting. They'll tell you very politely, you got the 20th, a little bit of the last of the 19th, we got the 21st. And it's true. And they will get there the way they're going because of their aggressiveness. And what we build are the symbols to prove that they're willing to make the experiments and they're healthy. They can afford to do it. We can too, but we choose to build private swimming pools and very expensive mansions, and it all gets sucked up privately or that, whatever, right? And we do it in a different way, right?
One more question, the last one.
Thank you, Tom, for a great presentation. I had one question. Back in the day, as you were a small company, the design was kind of like personal, I think. The question is, nowadays, when you are so big and the company is big, and how does the design process happen?
How did what?
The design process on a large project versus a small, intimate, residential project at the beginning of your career.
And how did it work?
He wants to know the design. Is it different in the office when you designed it on a little project when you're beginning of your career versus designing it now in this big project?
And how did that happen?
What's the difference?
The process.
The difference. Oh, it's no. I tried to. There were all kinds of points that went through. A house is a very simple, very personal communication between a person or a couple or something, and it's very malleable. You can live in a hut, you can live in a cave, you can live in a tree. I mean, hugely malleable. It's why it makes it an interesting experimental project, because there's such a relaxedness of program. As the projects get larger, they have consequences, and they, for me, the most interesting ones are immediately within a social, cultural, political context, urbanistically. And I've been always interested in the urban. That's been my preoccupation. My whole career has been projects as they connect to the city and as part of the increment of making the city making. And the house is just not consequential. And when we started building larger buildings, things that were implicit in the houses, including digging and environmental interests and contextual issues, were implicit. And as the work got larger, but it started with the competitions. So if I showed you Berlin, it was now explicit. And you could see the same strategy I'm using on the house at 6th Street, right? And you can now see that it's explicit. It has absolutely clear kind of notions of how to approach an urban project, having to do with a multiplicity of things and not a single thing, right? Which can't happen in the residence. And it's but there's a theme. I'm making this stuff right now, pieces of things, which definitely came from starting from scratch. If I'd have come out of another office or worked in a more corporate kind of I started with large buildings, I have no idea whether that happened or not, because there's certain things that became embedded in the office as we grew up. And some of them go back. That's why I purposely showed me in a shop. That used to be me. And I was making stuff. I'm still doing it, but I'm in other people's shops. Or I'm not doing it. I've got people doing it. Right? And they're in Zahner and they're in Gates, etc. What I'm showing you. And we're still making the prototypes, but they're getting much more sophisticated. Because now we're making things that I couldn't make. I couldn't have a shop that had that kind of quality that I can operate on a computer level. I can make prototypes. We have a 3D mill that's a very $250,000 piece of equipment that we make stuff on. And I have a very, very kind of advanced shop. And but it's prototypes. And we can speak to people. So if you talk to Gates, they'll tell you that my people are more advanced than just about anybody they have. We would be the most advanced research person in their office, which makes sense. They're architects, they're trained as architects, they're smart, they're energetic, etc. So they should be. And it makes sense. And if you go to Zahner, who we worked with way back from the courthouse, he's growing like we're growing. So we've grown together over 20 years. And he's always looking for a new opportunity. And so we're kind of playing games. Oh, let's come up with, I didn't show LTU. Because we did, at the last minute. It was supposed to be LTU for this guy. And we were using carbon fiber. And we were discussing earlier about using wood because we're dying to make a wood building. This was interesting. And we used carbon fiber at LTU. And the notion was, no, we just have to do carbon fiber because it's a cool material. And it's a state of the art. And you just want to be part of that. The technological component of your office that you've worked with these different ideas, which in fact led to Korea. It would be, because Korea could have been carbon fiber, but we found a material that's less money that operates under the same terms. But there's definitely a connection of definitely how you start out with the little stuff that stays in the culture of the office. Because I don't think that desk of the gentleman here, that our culture would be differentiated from many offices that still has that hand-on stuff that comes from the very beginning. Let me answer your question. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to our friends at CBT for initiating the Maurice Childs Lecture. And thank you, Thom Mayne, for being our inaugural lecturer. Let's show our appreciation once again. Thank you.